Young people see William Shakespeare not as a dead white poet, but as someone who was a rebel and a revolutionary and who put people on stage that would have gotten any other poet hanged. It
Mm.
was seditious for Shakespeare to put some of that history on stage. It was seditious for him to put women on stage, to put brown and black skinned people on stage, Muslims on stage, Jewish people on stage, and to give them a heart, or trans people on stage. He puts everyone on stage, gods and goddesses, everyone makes it on stage in Shakespeare's plays, and he gets away with it.
Exploring life's journey, one story at a time. This is Trailheads with Jim Barrett.
Today I'm joined by my longtime friend Dan McCleary, who is the founder of the Tennessee Shakespeare Company and also its artistic director. Dan has also directed and acted in As You Like It, playing Jock, Cyrano de Bergerac, playing Cyrano, Richard III, playing Richard, To Kill a Mockingbird, Much Ado About Nothing, and so many more. It's just an amazing list of your passion there, my friend. So congratulations on that and so much more.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Before we get started, Dan, I wanted to ask you too, hiking has always been an important part of my life, or at least in the last better part of 10 years, for several reasons. But when we were talking before, you mentioned that you do something similar to that to sort of keep your head straight. What is that?
I walk late at night, and it's very unoriginal. I take the same course every night. And so I like to think I know where all the holes are and where the curb cuts are. I was a runner early in life, a distance runner, and I loved being on the track. A lot of young people, I have a son who's a runner now too, and he gets bored unless he's running through the mud or running through water, racing against people. But I like not having to worry about the course. And that probably extends to life as well, because what it does for me, it also puts me under the moon and the stars, which I love. So it's very quiet, it's very alone. I don't have to worry about what's coming up. And so probably it makes me anxiety free. And what that does then, I've found, is it lets my mind wander. And that's really productive, I found, not just for a creative person, like you, like a lot of the people you're talking to, but I think it's important for all of us because, as I teach or do speeches or something, I think all of us are artists. We're all creative. It's so easy for us to be, to shut down something or to hate something or to judge something or to judge someone. But one of the things we learn in theater or when you do any sort of creative act is you learn to have compassion, and not just for others or something else or another way of life, but for yourself, for yourself as well. And so being a dad for so many years, having children on my own, I couldn't walk around at night. So my body was suffering from it. I was inhibited being in public. I didn't like how I looked. I didn't feel good. And so that starts to become psychological. And so I started walking about 5.5 years ago, and the only time I could. And I would do it as fast as I could to get back home for sleeping boys. But what it did was it was like an extended shower. Because a 2 or 3 minute shower will do that for me as well.
Right, right. Sure.
Lets my mind wander, and suddenly, oh, I was just productive in 3 minutes that I didn't go in and say, I want to think now. I want to go in and be creative now.
Hmm.
It's as much for my psyche as it is for my body. So yeah, moonlight walks.
I love that. I love at night. My hiking tends to be in the morning, right before the sun comes up. But I think whatever your connection is, I think also too, you and I are sort of, I think, physically built this way too. At a certain point in life, of course, it's not as easy to keep the pounds off, and so people will say, "Oh, I'd love to do that. Oh, I'd love to hike. I'd love to walk. I'd love to run, but I just don't have the time." And I've always been of the belief that you have to make the time because there is no time. You have to carve it out to do it.
I couldn't agree more. And, for anybody who's watching and listening, yes, the I don't have the time is the easy out. It really, but we make time to sleep.
Mm.
And we make time to take care. I mean, sure, everybody you talk to is going to be a compassionate person because I know you. We all make time for other people. We make time for our family, And it's a bit like, putting the mask over yourself first and going in the plane that's having an emergency situation before you put it over the child's mouth. We're not good for others. We're not helpful for others unless we're helpful to ourselves first.
So how did you start Tennessee Shakespeare Company? What is it? What led you to it? How did that all begin?
When I left school, I went to Temple University in Philadelphia, and um, I would do anything that paid, any acting job that would pay. And a lot of it were new plays and musicals. And I got to my mid 20s when I was living in Boston, and it wasn't feeling uh, very soulful or spiritually enriching for me. And I started to light upon actors who were doing more classical work and Shakespeare's work, and I gravitated to training of William Shakespeare's work at a fairly famous organization called Shakespeare Company in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. And I stayed there long enough that I ultimately became an associate artistic director, and I was playing Macbeth one. It was a Saturday afternoon. It was a lovely day outside. It was not lovely inside. We had about half a house, I remember, and Macbeth spends a lot of time on stage, not by himself, but with the audience. And I remembered thinking, and this was an audience that sat almost around us, and so there's no hiding, which I really appreciated about the space, and I appreciate about the act of theater uh, for an artist or certainly for an actor. And the concurrent thought ran through my head that day that I wasn't entirely convinced any longer that what I was doing was that enriching for an audience that looked an awful lot like me, which is to say white and male and of a certain age, and had more education than I did, and had seen the play probably more often than I'd performed it. And so I didn't know who I was speaking to, including myself. And that was at age 39. And I thought, well, if I don't do something that feels like I'm being of genuine service, not just service to myself, but service to my community, if I don't do it now before I turn 40, I don't know why I thought 40 is just some culturally magical number, perhaps, certainly for men. And I thought, well, if I don't do it now, I probably won't do it because I'll end up knowing too much and I'll be afraid to jump off. And so I left the company and I started looking at places in the South, Southern United States, where I felt pretty comfortable. I'd worked around the country in regional theaters, and I was looking for where there weren't Shakespeare companies because I wanted to start something that was based not just in performance, but in education and outreach and service as well. And so I was looking for geographies that had a need, whether they knew it or not. And our mutual friend, longtime friend and mentor, Frank Bluestein, was very instrumental in helping me establish an anchor in Memphis. That's where we began setting sail.
Frank Bluestein is a unique human. Dan and I both went through a very unique program that he has, which had theater and television. And I think you started in television, right?
I did. I started by carrying your camera cable at a mall, at a shopping mall. And I thought, well, if Jim Barrett, my hero, can do this, maybe I can too.
But the theater at Germantown, it is not a performing arts high school, but they have a nationally renowned, and some would say internationally renowned program there in the theater and then eventually in the TV station, which the TV station went in the summer before my senior year. And that's around the time you and I got acquainted, as you said, carrying the cable for me. But
Right. It was he did that. And you're right. It's important to note it was not a performing arts high school. It was known for sports, and he's a real role model. I know for you and me, people like Chris Parnell and Missy Pyle, many others. Whether it's performing arts or something else, it was just this sheer tenacity and agility and desire of one person to create something, especially for young people. And he was a real organizational role model too, to put something where not only there was no model for it, people didn't know they wanted it or needed it
Right.
either. And
Right.
importantly, he went out and got the funding for it as well. So he's a role model for us in many ways.
It's a very learn by doing environment. So it's not like he's just standing there giving you assignments that you complete. It's a very interactive process, I feel.
The key around it was that he gave us the keys,
Hmm.
quite literally. And we learned not just by doing, but by making plenty of mistakes. And as a really good teacher will do, they see things in young people that the young people don't see yet. Tennessee Shakespeare Company doesn't exist without him. And I think of all the great teachers in my life led by him and my mother as well. I think, where would we be without outstanding teachers? And and now he's more than that. He's family to me. So it's one of the things I'm very grateful for in life.
I lost both of my parents in the last few years. My dad and my adoptive stepmom, who was like a mom to me because she adopted me and my brothers when we were pretty young. But I lost both of them in the space of 2 years. And like a lot of us, I had some challenging times with both of my parents, and especially in high school. Um, but I loved my parents dearly, and now even more so that they're gone. But what I remember about that time is that I used to say that Frank was kind of my other father, the father who understood me in a way that my biological father didn't. And again, I want to say I loved my father dearly, and
Sure.
especially in those last few years. But Frank just understands a part of us and that artistic side of us and is able to speak to that and always has been able to. And I'm so appreciative of that.
The way I try to honor him and honor that, as I've told him, is I try to do it for others as well as I teach, and he and I'll talk about that a good bit. It feels really good to have an extended family like that of all of us.
Absolutely. You touched on it a little bit about your passion for wanting to do TSC was to introduce not just the performing arts, but to have an educational aspect to it. Can you talk a little bit about that and your involvement with the schools?
Well, yes, first to give a little scope to it, most regional theaters and certainly Shakespeare companies in the United States and North America, there used to be about 125. Now, here in the last 5 years, that's been reduced to less than 100. Uh, the performance aspect, the performance element of the company is usually the lodestar. And then, and I'll just be frank about it, an education component frequently is included as an afterthought in an effort to get grant money, to
Okay.
raise funds around.
Mhm.
And not that that's a disservice because a service is done with it, but I don't know that it's the right thing for the right reason. And, our experience, your and my experience, having been what it was in high school, and certainly for me, having probably saved my life, it felt that it was important when I talked about a professional Shakespeare company, which there had never been in Memphis and still isn't. And we're one of only two still in the state of Tennessee and the only one with our own permanent facility. It felt really important to talk about the effort or the idea, the notion, as as a center for Shakespeare, so that while it might be performance that has the glitter around it, it was important to me, and it's important to me still to note to actors who come in because our actors are artist managers, they're teachers, they're directors, they're actors. Um, the performance aspect doesn't always take precedence, either practically or philosophically. And what we started to see was a dearth of playing with Shakespeare in our Shelby County school system and our city of Memphis school system, and now the multiple municipal school systems. So I started by knocking on school doors and offering to teach students Shakespeare and to teach by doing. To harken back to that theme, we get the books out of their hands because it was important to me to let the students know that Shakespeare didn't mean his plays to be read. Most people couldn't read when he was writing. And if they could read, they weren't reading English. English was just coming into being when Shakespeare was writing his plays as a poet. And there were no directors for the stage at that time. So the poet, how they wrote the words on the page with variable spellings, with rhetorical punctuation instead of grammatical, was their direction of the actors. And an audience came, audience came to hear the play, to hear words spoken for the first time. And in England, to hear their history acted for the first time. So William Shakespeare writes England's history into audio existence, really. And so what was fun for me to go into schools with, this is going back nearly 20 years, was to let students know that Shakespeare's audience wasn't reading either. Shakespeare's audience hadn't seen many of these words either. And they hadn't seen a Brutus or a Mark Antony or an Othello yet. And you, student, could be the first. And so what we started doing was, and I have to say too, Jim, that, and this is sadly still the case, too many of our high school students had a fourth grade reading level. And so I went into one school and they gave me students. They said, oh, we have a lot of students for you. And so here I was trotting into the school and they said, wait till the school is out, class is out. The school dismissed, and all the detention students were sent to the auditorium, and there I went, and they turned out the lights and they propped open the door and said, there's your light, here are your students. And most of them tragically couldn't read, but they could call and respond. So if I fed them from behind quietly to be or not to be, and in a rhythm, in a heartbeat rhythm, which is how Shakespeare wrote, to the end of the verse line, they would repeat it, and then without a book in their hand, they would act it. And they'd act it with each other, give them pool noodles, and then they'll fight with them like they're swords. So they start to have a physical, a visceral, emotional experience of the text, as opposed to solely an intellectual experience of the text, and then an expectation, like I had in high school, to memorize text, stand up and repeat it. You get your A, you moved on. It immediately turned me off to Shakespeare, and I didn't want that to happen. It's easy to think, oh, well, this is a noble notion. But what started to happen was it was practical. What started to happen was we could apply what I just described to you. And that was being applied that was emergency. I needed help. I was often thrown into emergency situations. And so these were being made up as I went along. Well, we've now been in over 140 schools around the Southeast, and almost every school in Memphis. Wow. Doing this as a way to raise enthusiasm, to increase enthusiasm for learning how to read, to raise enthusiasm for learning how to read more, wanting to read more, and for ensuring that young people, certainly here in Memphis, see William Shakespeare not as a dead white poet, but as someone who was a rebel and a revolutionary, and who put people on stage that would have gotten any other poet hanged. It was seditious for Shakespeare to put some of that history on stage. It was seditious for him to put women on stage, to put brown and black-skinned people on stage, Muslims on stage, Jewish people on stage, and to give them a heart. Or trans people on stage. He puts everyone on stage, gods and goddesses. Everyone makes it on stage in Shakespeare's plays, and he gets away with it. And so when students hear that they're saying words that are maybe curse words, or they're words that nobody else knows, honorific habilitudinitatis, longest words Shakespeare writes, or they have puns or dirty jokes, that's one thing. Assassination, for instance, the word assassination, Brutus utters it. Well, it didn't really have a social meaning back then. And I remember asking, Brutus is talking about killing Julius Caesar, and he's asking the audience about assassination. And I remember speaking in a classroom, and there was a boy in the back who couldn't have cared less, had his head down, he was sleeping. And I asked everyone, what does assassination mean? No one had an answer. It's a class of 35 children, freshmen. And I said, well, sound it out. What does it sound like? And the boy in the back, he woke up and he raised his hand and he said, well, there are two asses in it. Yes, that's true. And so how many S's is that? It's 4 of them. And then what's the last half of the word? Nation. So what does it sound like is going on in the word? Well, it sounds like The nation's going to get poisoned. Oh, well, I don't think we're going to look up the Webster's dictionary definition after that. I think I'm going to use that definition from now on. And that was 19 years ago, and here I am still using it. Children love playing with Shakespeare. And the other thing, practical thing that happens is that their grades go up. Their rate of graduation increases. We've now been able to scale this with federal grants, state grants, local grants, and look back now at a full generation of students who have graduated or not, had grades or not, contributed back to their community or not, balance between those who participated with us in our education programs like the Romeo and Juliet Project, the Macbeth Initiative, our play shops, our residencies, and those who didn't. And those over here are by far well over 30% more contributors to their communities. The graduation rate is more than 29% higher, and their average ELA grade, English Language Arts grade, is a letter to a letter and a half higher than those who didn't participate in our education programs.
So how does that feel to you, Dan, to be able to help ignite that torch and pass it on to this generation? How does that feel to you as an artist and a leader and a scholar in your field to pass that baton like that?
This year, it's become really hard to anticipate those programs beginning. So it's a bit like it's a bit Sisyphusian, rolling a rock up and it's rolling back down when I consider what's going on at the federal level and at the national level and things getting canceled on us and others. And
Yeah.
so it feels really, again, to be frank with you, it feels hard. It's really hard to do. At the same time, we all do something hard in life. But the other end of it is that we know that if we're able to accomplish the hard thing, it increases our humanity and it increases our cultural awareness here in Memphis, which is in dire need of it. So it feels galvanizing. It feels revolutionary here. It's really strained. It's really hard as well because, Jim, there's no earned income in it. If we don't raise the money for it, then it doesn't happen. So often it feels like we're alone in the effort, but we always come back to feeling like we're doing the right thing for the right reason. So I often go back and look at myself at age 39, and that part of the dream being fulfilled is very gratifying. But more often than not, I go back to year my age and in high school and wishing that I had that when I was in high school as well. And so doubly gratifying is being able to give something, I learned from my experience and being able to give what I didn't get to a next generation leads me to hope that they will do the same thing for the generation that comes behind them.
Yeah, love that. I have to talk on that subject of, again, back to our original age when we met. I have to tell you, this may bring a smile to your face. How my first really foray into Shakespeare as an elementary and middle schooler was my passion for Star Trek, which many of the original series episodes were Shakespeare quotes. All are
Yeah.
yesterday by any other name. Conscience of the King, some of the original series episodes, and I had heard the name Shakespeare, but we hadn't really studied him in elementary school yet. So that prompted me to go to the library and look it up and to learn more about it, and
Oh,
eventually,
really?
yeah. So that's what started my curiosity about it, and even that was carried on in Next Generation and some of the subsequent Star Trek series is that sort of central. And the character of Jean-Luc Picard in Next Generation is a passionate Shakespeare student and scholar. So I just didn't know.
As is the actor, as
Yes,
he was raised at the
Shakespeare,
RSC.
Royal Shakespeare Company, right. Well, there's a story here that since Frank Bluestein is not here, I can embellish it however much my ignorance will allow. But my understanding was that Patrick Stewart was there doing some workshops with kids at the PPP, and he was on standby because it was him and two other people that were up for the part. And I guess this is right before cell phones. And so he asked Mr. Bluestein, can please let me know if my agent calls because I'm expecting an important phone call. I may be the captain of a starship. And so it came through, I think, when he was at Germantown or within a week or so.
No,
And then
really.
Frank actually had to give Jean-Luc Picard directions on how to get to I-40 so he could drive to his next stop in Nashville. It's that or words to that effect, but it's just fascinating to me that our mentor wrote directions for the captain of the Starship Enterprise. But I digress.
I didn't know that. That's lovely.
This is going to be a very pedestrian question for somebody of your education and experience. What is it about Shakespeare that is important and relevant today?
Well, we all have an ownership of him. He's really taught us language. And if I get out of, my own theatrical headspace, and stagecraft and that, there is what I discover with Shakespeare is that regardless of your and my or anybody's level of formal education, we're exposed to Shakespeare's language on a daily basis. It's frequently misused. We'll see newspaper headlines that will talk about wherefore, for instance, the word wherefore art thou Romeo. The wherefore is often misdefined in it, but the word is still part of our ethos. And the text is still part of our ethos. Brevity is the soul of wit. Um, it might be part of our ethos and we don't know the author of it. So I think it's important that we know who coined the phrases, and that we also know, though, and once that door gets opened and we start getting interested in what he wrote and then potentially in his own life, he was a terribly flawed man. And he had his own tragedy, as we all do in our lives, in his life as well. And you can trace that through his plays. And so for me right now, and for maybe the past 5, 6 years, it's been important to follow the man. And once you start following the man, then we start to take him down as a stone bust, or the thing that we're expected to learn, or that it requires some scholarship to deal with him. It does not. And so you say the question is pedestrian, but Shakespeare is a pedestrian. He's an everyday man. He's a family man, and he's a sweet man, and he's a flawed man, and he's a man who was born into some privilege and then had his own troubles in his own marriage, and he probably also questioned his own sexuality, and he probably had his sonnets exposed to the world without his knowledge. So who amongst us haven't written a love letter that we would prefer to remain either anonymous or hidden in the chest? We can ask Emily Dickinson about that too. But once we start, the language I think is a hook for us, because we can discover to a young child or to someone who's 90 years old, oh, you just spoke Shakespeare right there. You just called somebody green-eyed. Once you open the door to it, though, what Shakespeare does for us is he exposes our psychology, and he exposes the fact, I call it a fact, at least for me, that our multiplicity makes us stronger. He was working in a time of what was called a chain of being, an Elizabethan chain of being, and it was accepted, in fact, upon some pain of consequence, that humans lived, at a here, there was a hierarchy, and there was a god, and gods and goddesses, and angels and cherubim, and then there's humans and fowl and animals and rocks, and so there's this a chain of being, a chain of living, and that and in the Indian religions they have this too, where humans have an awakening at the heart level, it's spine and heart level. We have a spiritual level there. It's not just intellectual, but it's spiritual too. And Shakespeare is teaching us how to be human, and where we transcend religion, where we transcend our cultures, where we transcend our gender, uh, where in fact the theater becomes, and his stories become, a melting place or melting pot of multiple opinions. It's not just that it becomes a melting pot, it's that we hear each other's opinions
Hmm.
and that we accept each other's opinions. And we speak, and this is why I love being a classical actor or running a classical uh, theater company, is that it's the actor's job to speak that which can't be spoken. If we go back to Greek times, there's this beautiful trinity of theater, therapy, and theology, and theater being born out of what we know as theater, thea, Thea, of God. And so theater being born out of a need to heal God or to see God and to speak that which can't be spoken, or to speak our dreams, what's going on at the subconscious level. And I think Shakespeare does that for us. He often does it when the actor is left alone on stage, and being able to put words to dreams or thoughts or impulses, it's a special talent. It's an art in and of itself, but we need to be able to do that. Those are actors teaching patrons, teaching children, teaching humans of any age to do this as well. It actually is what makes us healthier. And when we listen, it makes us healthier. If we're not going to be willing to listen to one another, it becomes very difficult to communicate. It's like with an actor, a classical actor, um, who deals in violence with a character, which I've done. If you play a Mark Antony or a Macbeth or a Richard III or a Coriolanus, then you kill people on stage. If you're in Romeo and Juliet, you harm people on stage. 5 children end up dead on stage. Well, what in the world are we doing teaching this play to freshmen in a high school when the end result is children aged 13, 14 or so, 5 of them are dead on stage, and we start the play telling everybody how the play is going to end. Well, where's the excitement in this, or where's the peace in this? Well, the peace in it is that Shakespeare is probably uh, giving a signpost through the play. It's not just that the actors are given choices, the audiences are given choices. Well, what choice would you make here as the religious head? What choice would you make here as the father? What choice would you make here as the mother? What choice would you make here as the mentor, the slightly older mentor? Because these people are all making the wrong choices.
Hmm.
Shakespeare allows for this, and he allows for flawed psyches on stage so that an audience isn't preached to. An audience isn't given answers. An audience is given questions, and then the audience gets to leave wrestling with the questions for themselves. So, theater for me, classical theater, and in particular Shakespeare, for the long winded answer to your very good question, encourages our curiosity. And uh, I think the more we're curious and the less we know, the more we're engaged with our own humanity. That's what Shakespeare teaches us.
Thank you for that. That is, wow. That was just, I loved the depth and the dimension of that answer, because I don't think I've ever heard the relevance of Shakespeare and the power of Shakespeare combined into encapsulated into such a, thank you for that, Dan. What is
Thank you.
what is it like for you? Uh, because you've directed many shows, Shakespeare plays, but you've also performed them. What is it like for you to inhabit one of those main characters on the stage? What is it like? And talk about, if you have played a character multiple times, which I know you have, do you bring a different perspective to that character in the different times that you have played him?
Yes, and I would say for those listening and watching too, what becomes my experience of that is also your experience of a William Shakespeare play, or a Byron poem, or a Dickinson poem, or reading, oh, Goodnight Moon, again, when you're 40 or 50 years old. I love things that are on paper, but I also really love things on stage and seeing them or playing them over decades, because all of us as human beings, whether on stage or off stage, or if we don't sit in judgment on it, if we're not critical, self-critical, or critical of what we're seeing and hearing, then we get to have this a wonderful relationship with our younger selves. And once we start to do that, I find that we start to glean, oh, well, look what I know now.
Hmm.
Oh, my mind or my thinking hasn't shifted since I was 20 years. I'm still somewhat, my psyche or my mindset is still somewhat stillborn from there. I need to adjust off of that. It's a check-in for us. It's a humanity check-in for us. And I think the arts, whether it's dance or visual art or outdoor sculpture or film, especially film, going back and revisiting, a Casablanca or a Nosferatu, since seeing them, at age 8 or 9, now at age 58, and remembering me and my relationship to it at first and those around me, it's a lovely life check-in. And then in playing them, uh, it takes a lot of energy to play uh, a, a Shakespeare role, especially one who dies
Hmm.
or one who kills. And I have a lot, and um, I wouldn't say I can't afford to be much of as I used to be, which is far more towards being a method actor. It's a 24-hour energy, and I often wanted to be left alone in the rehearsal process, and I mean entirely.
Hmm.
And once I stepped into the building, that was my commitment. I didn't talk about anything other than what was on the agenda for the 7-hour rehearsal day. I can't quite be like that anymore because my awareness is, to grants and to fundraising, or the patron who just walked in the door, or the toilet that's not working, or the AC that's out. So I can't quite be that selfish. Um,
And as a
uh,
parent now too.
and as a parent, I have to leave my phone on because I never know when I'm going to get an emergency call, which seems to happen a lot. Uh, but what that's done is it's allowed my awareness to also be on what my director needs from me as an actor. It's allowed my awareness to go to what apprentices or younger actors might need from me as a potential acting mentor as well. I don't really serve, what I learned is I'm not really serving anyone other than myself when I rehearse like that or when I prepare like that. And so I've become much more collaborative. The old saying, when you teach and you have to speak something out loud to somebody, you suddenly find out what you know, and just as importantly, what you don't know, uh, but what you believe. You go home at the end of the night, I really said that to that person. Is this really what I believe? I thought I had something else in mind. Well, maybe not. So, when you're an actor in that way, uh, it's it's more frightening, I would say, to be that vulnerable and that communal, um, and to make, rehearsal is about making mistakes. And, it's like the world of a clown. If you're a fan of Buster Keaton or a Charlie Chaplin, the difference between the clown and the tragedian is that the clown dies 100 times in an hour, but the clown always gets back up. And that's the humor of it. And some of the clowns don't learn, and so the humor is that they don't learn, but the viewer has learned, and they watch the banana peel and they watch Buster walking to it. They know what he's going to do, and he does it fantastically. He meets expectations. And others, they flip the coin on us, and they actually do learn from it. So I've learned to be more communal as an actor in my work, and that we also get taught that as directors too. You have to hold all the room together, um, and everyone's bringing in their own fears every day, their own joys every day. And it's a way to find the story through that particular group of people on an hour by hour basis.
Mm.
And so it always feels urgent and personal to me.
I want to go back to something you touched on a few minutes ago, which was the power of film and filmmaking. I remember you and I had a conversation about this in the 1990s. You would come out to LA to see Chris Parnell, and he was really busy one day, and so I took you out to go show you LA. But I had asked you about, hey, what do you think about the new Romeo and Juliet movie, the one with Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio? And you touched on Coriolanus a few minutes ago, one of Shakespeare's later works. But I saw the film recently with Ray Fiennes and Gerard Butler. I was curious about your take, and I know that each film is done in a different way according to the director and the interpretation of it. But how do you feel about these productions that, from my perspective, it was trying to find a package to introduce young people to Shakespeare? What are your feelings on films that sort of explore that space?
I think if William Shakespeare were alive today, he would be absolutely fascinated with film and with technology. Maybe not with AI stuff, but certainly with exploration, space exploration, science fiction, fantastical stories, and there's much to support that theory. So much of what drives his playwriting as he gets to later in life are the women in his life, and also escape and myth as well. He loved the fantastical. I mean, he had gods and goddesses walking into the, you mentioned As You Like It. Well, here comes the god at the end of the play to wrap things up or to solve things. And I think he would love film.
Hmm.
But here's the distinction for me. Uh, and I find myself on one side or the other and trying not to have a judgmental opinion, but trying to get them to, to be merged. Because when we have Shakespeare on film, what I know automatically is that that's introducing many people to Shakespeare. And for others, it's potentially reigniting them to a story that's really, as I've said, part of our ethos. The other side of me goes, well, Shakespeare's visual is his language,
Hmm.
and film is a visual medium. As you well know, when you look at a film script, you have to do a lot of imagining. You're not reading words of text as much as you are reading what the writer wants to be seen. Shakespeare's writing words to be heard. And when you look at the first folio, you look at the script. It's not a film. It's not a screenplay. It's not David Mamet. It's certainly not Tennessee Williams, who writes voluminously and florally about what's supposed to be seen on stage. There is nothing on stage. On the Rose Theater, the Globe Playhouse stage, for Elizabethan actors. It's a bare stage.
Hmm.
They may bring a bed out. There may be a pot of something, but these are hand props.
Hmm.
And the costumes are relatively modern. So what the actors have is their breath and their text. There's no, there's nothing, there's no chandelier flying in. There might be a hole in the floor, a pit, so they can be vanished. They might lower someone in with ropes, but this is hardly high tech.
Right.
So when I see film, and I have to say, I haven't seen most films that are of Shakespeare's stories. I have seen some, but there's usually spectacle involved. You see The Tempest, and obviously they're going to go out onto a deserted island or to some place that looks like an island and see the fairies and the Caliban monsters and the ocean and the storm, and have it be computer generated. Maybe Shakespeare would have loved this right now, but the power of Shakespeare's play is in the words. And to me, it either becomes on film a cloying or duplicitous aspect. It's being spoken at the same time you're seeing it. Then my imagination doesn't need to work. Then I don't need to. Then my I don't need to work as hard intellectually, or my ears don't need to work as hard.
Right.
And so it becomes one or the other. And frequently, what I find, Jim, is that the beauty of verse or the beauty of the image for film is chosen to be extracted and replaced with what the medium wants,
Mm.
which is the visual. So that breaks my heart
Mm.
frequently. So those are the two sides for me.
Okay. I just recently was watched The Tragedy of Macbeth, which was, Joel Cohen's production of it with Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand. When you were just talking, it was in black and white, and the sets were very minimalist, and so I felt like that film spoke to some of the things that you're saying. It didn't have a lot of razzmatazz and Steadicam and fast editing, and that it really felt like it was a step beyond being on a stage because of editing and scene changes and that sort of thing. So. Um, I it was interesting that you were just talking about that because that's something I really noticed about the choices that were made for that film. Have you seen
Well,
that?
Macbeth is a really is a it's a terribly important play to always be seen and experienced, and especially now, it's the Shakespeare was writing that in one of his four times of plague, and it could well have been that I don't believe that he's writing about a man when he's writing about Macbeth. He's writing about a contagion, something that's infecting his country, and clearly the moral abuse of authority and power. And it, having played Macbeth many times, what I can tell you is, from that perspective at least, is that it's almost impossible to play because it feels too frequently superhuman,
Hmm.
that it's happening not just fantastically, but almost at an electrical stage, at a subconscious stage, multiple thoughts happening at the same time and being spoken out loud and then being enacted and then going at least slightly insane.
Hmm.
So out of moral sanity. And of course, that's where the United States is right now.
Yeah, yeah. It is remarkable to see time and time again how universal and how ahead of his time he really was, and the themes that he chose to explore are still around and are still, the relevance is still very, very much there, like you just said about Macbeth, especially. Um, and I felt that way too when I was just watching Coriolanus. I felt that a lot of that same turmoil is what we're dealing with today.
Well, Coriolanus is a great example of it's a far superior political play
Mm.
to Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is a love story to me. Coriolanus, it has a lot of length to it, but Coriolanus was really born. It was a 1608 creation. It was really born out of two things, I think. One, Shakespeare's mother had just died,
Mm.
and he's writing this piece. It's based on a story by Plutarch, um, from his lives book of noble Greeks and Romans. But he really pulls out the role of Volumnia, who's the powerful mother of Marcius Coriolanus. But then also there were corn riots going on in the Midlands at the time in England. Finally, the people were, like in a Clifford Odets play of the early 20th century America, were standing up to a forceful dictatorship, or what they felt was a dictatorship, a forceful government. And so here was this man, Marcius, who was a killing machine, a quote unquote thing of blood, who was a great patriot, but for the patrician class, so for the moneyed class. And what was good for him was trickle down economics. It should have been good for everybody else. And the plebeians, the people, rage against him and ultimately banish him. He gets banished from to name the story, he gets banished from his country. And then he comes back with his arch enemy, Tullus Aufidius, the Gerard Butler character, and is about to raise Rome.
Mm.
He's about to lay waste to Rome, but his family comes and begs forgiveness and mercy. And we may never see it in our current story right now, but it's important for all of us to know the story that even someone who was hell-bent on destruction to the extent of killing his own family still could be appealed to, knowing full well that it meant the sacrifice of his life for that of his family and country. That's the part of the story that often gets omitted, but it's the great fifth act of Coriolanus. And I don't know, maybe there's a fifth act for us too.
Where do you guys stand right now? What are your immediate future plans that are in the works right now as you go into or as you complete your 17th season?
Well, it's precarious. We're like every Shakespeare theater company. And again, to give it scope, with the reduced number of regional theaters in America and the even more reduced number of Shakespeare companies in America, if you look at their upcoming seasons or current seasons, you notice something, that if you're the fill in the blank state Shakespeare company, you notice a paucity of Shakespeare titles. Shakespeare is expensive to produce. You do Antony and Cleopatra or Coriolanus. Well, there's 31 to 45 different named characters. There's 54 different scenes in Antony and Cleopatra. So and if you go to a Broadway play and you pay $500, you want spectacle. And unfortunately, a lot of our patrons want spectacle, but Shakespeare needn't be like that. Shakespeare used to take his actors down to his company down to 9 or 10 actors and tour through the provinces. Many of them spies for the government, by the way, because they're all automatically traveling, but we won't get into that. So I think there's much to lean on with Shakespeare's touring and original productions of his plays that other theaters in the country aren't gravitating toward. And this reason is because we are nowhere near back to where we were pre-pandemic. Patrons are not nearly back to coming to live theater pre-pandemic. And on top of this for theaters is that we've already had a lot of grants canceled or delayed. And I don't mean just whimsical grants that we historically receive. When I say we, I'm talking about regional theaters, specifically Shakespeare companies, and us too. Tennessee Shakespeare Company had something canceled or declined. We can't get a straight answer right now. But that could be, when you consider matching funds, Jim, for us in the coming year, that could be anywhere between $50,000 and $150,000 of lost revenue for specific projects. And we'll do projects for military veterans. A lot of us have family who are at Tennessee Shakespeare Company who are veterans or who were veterans. It's something that's close to our hearts. And that's our Feast of Crispian South project, which just got defunded by the federal government to a large extent. So in answering your question, we've got 5 different seasons and budgets prepared for what we may hear this month in terms of grant funding at the federal and the state level. Because, even for states, no matter what state you're living in right now, your state receives federal grant dollars, and those up to a certain percentage are part of grants that then get funneled through state authorities to other not-for-profit organizations. So for us as a performance group, it doesn't necessarily harm our ability to perform, but it does harm our other projects that are of great value for us and where our heart lives. Our outreach programs for military veterans, where, by the way, we give veterans the text of Henry V, or we give veterans the text of Richard III, and they get up and they speak the text, and it has some distance for them. They're going to know more about what it means to once more go into the breach than I will. They'll know firsthand from their lives, but speaking this text will, for those veterans who are in the PTSD or the chemical dependency wards here at the Memphis VA hospital, it gives them an opportunity to speak their experiences with psychological distance and to regain some health. And we do that also for children in more than 50 schools in the city. And if our Macbeth initiative, for instance, is canceled or defunded, that would be $50,000. So we're finding plan Bs, Cs, and Ds in an effort to ensure that we go back to support our elementary, middle, and high schools teachers with programming and to support our students. So in many ways, Jim, it feels like I expect, I plan for the worst and hope for the best. But in planning for the worst, it feels like in many ways we're going back about 18 or 19 years and potentially starting over in an effort to find stopgaps to, a loss of bridge to funding. But what we still do is we have a shout out series that we take for free out to the community. We'll do Much Ado About Nothing in very non-traditional spaces in underserved communities. We'll also take Romeo and Juliet out to underserved communities as well, quite likely doing Taming of the Shrew and bringing back our literary salon series too. It's an effort to make Shakespeare and classical texts, which I believe have healing power, accessible to as many people as possible. That means taking transportation away as an obstacle, taking price points away as an obstacle. But what it does mean is that when we lose grants, then we start to have to earn our way, in a different way. So you catch me on a day when I'm in plan 5 right now.
A lot of options.
But what I can tell you is we will continue. We'll still continue at about $1 million level of an operating budget for the coming year.
For those watching who are just hearing about TSC or who've learned more about it in our conversation, where can somebody go to be able to support you, whether it's online or where can they go? What can they call? How can they get involved to assist you and your team?
Oh, that's very kind of you, Jim. Thank you. tnshakespeare.org. tnshakespeare.org has everything you need right on the landing page. And I love people writing. When you see my name, you can pick up the phone and call me or write me. I love talking to everybody, and I will. I'm easy to find, and I want to be found too.
I went back and looked at some of our archived messages. One was back in 2008 when you guys, your first office in that little railroad building right next to the tracks in Old Town Germantown, and where you are today. What do you remember about those first days? You were telling me that you waved to the conductors every 28 minutes or something, I did believe.
Yes, for the nice guy price of $1 a year, the city of Germantown gave us a fairly dilapidated train depot from the late 19th century. And I loved it. We would tour people. We were acted as docents. But my office, happily, was, it scooted out. The telegraph operator could sit inside the table. And then it was a bit of a bay window. So you could do like this both ways and see down the railroad track. But you could hear the train coming. We get anywhere between 28 and 43 a day across 24 hours. But 28... during work hours. So it was a lot. And I could tell how fast they were coming and what they were carrying and how many cars there were by the first sound I heard. And so if I was on the phone with a potential grantor or board member, and I frequently was, I would hear the whistle and I'd tell them, listen, there's a coal train coming. He's going to blow his whistle, and you and I are not going to be able to hear each other. So you have a choice. You can either say yes to me right now, or I'm going to hang up and call you back once the train is done because he's moving at 40 miles an hour. I'm going to call you back in 6.5 minutes. What'll it be? You'll be surprised how many yeses I got after that, because it was deafening. You couldn't hear. I couldn't hear anything over the phone, but it was great for a sense of urgency. I loved it. I loved being there. Usually the donor didn't want to wait around on me to call back and henpeck them. They just went on and said yes.
That's a great story and probably a great motivator.
I love trains and the railroad. It's very romantic to me. And frequently the people I was talking to, they loved it as well. I understand. I hear it from my house too.
I just realized in terms going back to what we learned in high school, your boys are now about the age you and I were when we met and are very, very active in sports and in the arts. How are Sully and Collins doing?
They're doing great, thank you. I was reminded because Frank Bluestein and his wife Brenda are aunt and uncle to Collins and Sullivan, and then our mutual friend Chris Parnell. He's a godfather to them as well. So it's quite a family. They've been raised in Shakespeare, but I my hope is that they don't want to be in theater. I know how hard it is, and they're so much smarter than me. And I was reminded, Frank took us out to dinner not long ago, and I was reminded seeing them both sit there that it was also the age I met you, I met Chris, I met Mr. Bluestein, and it meant an awful lot to see, 2 generations later. I'm an old guy. 2 generations later, them meeting one another. So they've really gravitated into sports. They're about to be Eagle Scouts. One's a pianist, one's a violinist. They're all state. They've loved being on stage. They've had that experience, and now they're wanting to either fly fighter jets or be doctors or be architects, which would be fine by me,
That's
says
a
one dad to another.
Yes, yes, yes. My going back to your first season, my kids at the time in 2008 when you guys did As You Like It, right? Was the first
Right,
there
right.
at St. George's outdoors in Barbara's Forest of Arden, I believe it was
You're
called.
right.
And my kids were there not for that one. I beg your pardon. That was just me there with other alum who we know for that first performance. But the next year, when you guys did A Midsummer Night's Dream and you performed that, was that at
Yes,
Germantown?
we went back to our old stage at the Poplar Pike Playhouse.
My kids were just mesmerized. And I think that that was a game changer for, believe it or not, my 3-year-old at the time, who just could not stop talking about it afterwards.
Mm.
He is now an arts student at UC Santa Cruz and is doing great. And
Oh,
then my older two are now 24 and 25, which is that's weird to just say to utter those numbers out, you know. But thank you for that. Is there anything specific coming up that people in the area can know about? What's coming up in the coming weeks, months for you guys?
the Memphis area, all of Western Tennessee can now look forward to our production of Much Ado About Nothing, which will be traveling to many, many outdoor locations in the month of, 2 months, September and October. It's now a month-long series that was born out of, we had little 2 and 3-hander shows that we would take to schools. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could take this where lunch trucks are, where people are having lunch outdoors, or do them in children's playgrounds?
Mhm.
And we did. And it absolutely blossomed over the last 8 years. So this will be our ninth annual free shout out series. And we haven't done Much Ado About Nothing yet. And what's lovely about it is that it's another way that Shakespeare treated war. All the men are coming back from war, and they're costumed in it, but the rest of the play isn't at all about that. It's about the whimsy that is aroused from it, and love that is aroused from it, and a sense of home
Mm.
that's aroused from it. And all of our shout out productions, we cut our plays down to 90 minutes. There's no intermission. We move lickety split, which is how Shakespeare should go. And as I tell our audiences, it's really not important to understand every word or hear every word, but they feel engaged. We have audiences who come out and bring picnics, and it's very family friendly. All of our productions are, and it's dog friendly as well. They bring their animals too. We get planes coming overhead, we get trains, we get birds, we get animals on the stage, just as Shakespeare would have had. So it becomes very immediate too. So it's a lot of fun. And if Shakespeare is not fun, if it's not played with alacrity, if it's not enjoyable, then we need to get out of the business. And the shout out series reminds us of that. So that's what's coming up. That's what's to look forward to.
Wonderful. Well, Dan McCleary, thank you so much. Founder of the Tennessee Shakespeare Company, actor, director, producer, all of those hats that you wear. Thank you for taking the time out. And one last time, tell people where they can go to learn more about Tennessee Shakespeare Company, or if they want to make a contribution.
To tnshakespeare.org.
All right, and that's
Thank
right
you,
here
Jim. I
on the
appreciate
screen.
that.
All right, Dan. Well, thank you. It's great to talk to you as always, and thank you for filling us in on your passion for Shakespeare and just for everything Tennessee Shakespeare Company. I appreciate you, and thank you for your time, my friend.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks, fellow dad. Congratulations on life, and good luck with your new blog. You do a great job. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.